I'd like to welcome all of you, those of you that are here in person at McDougall United Church in Calgary, and all of you who are joining us virtually. Barrie Clayton will give us a warm welcome after we open with prayer. So please, let's take a moment and open with prayer. As we begin our work this afternoon, we want to give thanks for all the volunteers we have in Chinook Winds region, especially today for all the trustees who have taken time from their busy schedules to learn more about their work within their community of faith. Be with each and every one of us as we do God's work for our community. We pray also for safe travels for those who are participating in person. We are so appreciative of the leadership for this workshop and give thanks. We know that we do not do this work alone. We know, our Lord, that you walk with us. This we pray in your name. Amen.
Well, as chair of the board here at Board of Trustees here at McDougall, I certainly welcome you here. Gratified to have so many people turn out, and certainly welcome all the people online as well at home watching this. And I hope nobody has had difficulty getting logged online. We apologize if you haven't, and I guess it's kind of an apology and abstention, because if you can't hear me now, you're not online. But there are contacts that Val is at the back monitoring the chat. The meeting is, of course, being live streamed, and if you've got questions during the meeting and you're watching it virtually, you can go on to the chat, or you can use the phone number for Val and text something to her. She will bring it before the meeting at the appropriate time. So I'd like to just acknowledge the tech team here, Chris on sound, Dave, who's certainly done a lot of work on the video, putting everything together for us, along with Shelley and some others at the region, and Val is on camera. Val is one of our trustees, and will be keeping track of all the happenings going on, moving the camera around. So welcome. Some of you have already found the coffee back at the back table. There will be no coffee break during our meeting, so anytime you want to go back and fill up your cup, just go ahead and do it. Or, of course, after the meeting is over, you're welcome to stay around afterwards and talk to other trustees or to us on the property committee. Whatever you wish, it's there for you. I'm sorry for those people at home. You're free to get up and have coffee anytime you want to, but I'm sorry we won't be able to deliver. Because the meeting is on live stream and being recorded, if you've got any questions or comments, can you just raise your hand, please? And Darren will bring a mic around, because it has to be on mic or else nobody else is going to hear you outside the building. I'd like to start, as we often do, with a land acknowledgement, and just reading this land acknowledgement that we often use here at McDougall. We respectfully acknowledge the history, culture, and spirituality of the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, and Stoney Nakoda peoples of Treaty 7, and their traditional territories within which McDougall United Church and Chinook Winds region resides. We are proud as Canadians to share in the ongoing treaty relationship with Indigenous people, and in the special relationship we honor with the Métis Nation of Alberta and their many members in Region 3. So the other thing I wanted to mention is that you probably have noticed a teepee in the sanctuary, and I wanted to just briefly speak about that, because having a teepee in the sanctuary is not a usual thing for our churches. Back in 2016, we hired Tony Snow, who was at that time taking the ministry course at Sandy Soto Seminary, and of course as part of the requirements for graduating from that and being prepared for being ordained, he had to have some time spent in the congregation, so we hired him here as a pastoral care minister half-time. And he evolved into family ministry. And it was during that time that we received the teepee as a symbol of friendship, and to continue the conversation around reconciliation and right relations here at McDougall. Now, Tony has moved on to being Indigenous Minister for Chinook Winds region, and so the teepee is being used as a backdrop and part of their programming quite often. You may have seen the teepee as a backdrop for videotaping that Tony has done. So that's the reason it's here. We do want to continue this conversation. We think it's an important part of our ministry. And if you want any further information about the teepee or about the treaties, there's some papers over there on those tables that if you want to have a look at later, you can. So back to you, Sue.
So this trustees workshop is being put on by the Property Working Group of Chinook Winds Region. And I'd like to take time now to introduce you to the members of the Property Working Group. I am the chair of the Property Working Group. Mary Axworthy, who was sitting at the registration desk, is our secretary. Barrie Clayton is one of the members. Mel Spence, who lives in Redcliffe, Alberta, and is joining us virtually, is a member of the Property Working Group. And our staff support for the Property Working Group is Reverend Joel Denhan.
We have photos.
We're going to have a picture up of showing, there's Mel and Mary came to the back door, but those are the other two. So we're a small group. We're looking for people that are interested in joining us. There's always room for more people because there's a lot of work in the Property Working Group. But through the Property Working Group, we felt it was time to start to try and help our communities of faith with information that is important to them. And the work of trustees falls under the Property Working Group. And so we felt it was time to do a trustees workshop. I'm just going to quickly update you on the things that we are going to cover today. There's a slide to show that. So we'll talk briefly about the trust model deed. We'll talk about the role of the trustees. We'll talk very briefly about insurance. Then there'll be a little conversation about how do you go about updating your trustees with the region and your land title and the land titles. Then there'll be some conversation about prudent, faithful investment versus risk aversion investment. And then we have a presentation, and it's called New Wineskins for New Wine, and that is very exciting, and Barrie will be sharing that with us. And then we'll share with you the recommended process for property transactions. So those are the topics that we're going to work with today. There will be times for questions. In some cases throughout the presentation, in other cases, listen to the presentation, and then there'll be time for question and answers. So again, welcome all. So I'm going to take the first steps, and it's actually the role of trustees. No, trust model deed. And so I'm going to ask Joel to come up. Yeah, sorry, we were back, and then we fixed it, and then I didn't fix it on mine. So Joel is going to do the first start, which is talking about the trust model deed of the United Church.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm assuming I'm live. Oh, now I'm live. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you all here. It's great to see people that I've seen before in 3D. And then only recently in the last several years, we've been seeing people flat on the screen. So it's nice to see more 3D folks. It's great to see folks participating in the event online. I want to indicate, just from my perspective, that the total attendance to this workshop is about double what we would have expected between you folks here in the room and the folks out there in Radio Land, as they say. And so as a result, our volunteers, the tech team, Barrie, the Property Working Group, but also your Chinook Winds region staff, the communications side and also the administration side, Mauricio, have been working flat out to be able to get all of the registrations going and get everything documented. So it's really great to have this much interest and participation in a trustee workshop. And I get to talk to you about the model trust deed. So in the United Church of Canada, we are a unique animal in the entire Canadian charitable landscape, because the United Church of Canada is established as a charity under its own federal act, the United Church of Canada Act. And as a result, everything that happens in the United Church is governed under that act and not governed by the provincial Societies Acts or any of those regulations, okay? So that's the important thing to begin with, is that we're a unique unicorn in the charitable landscape of Canada. Because of that, with a few notable exceptions, all congregational property, all community of faith property in the United Church of Canada is held under a unique instrument called the Model Trust Deed, okay? And I had the privilege some years ago of working with one of the preeminent experts on trust law in Canada as we did some work around the Property Council, which is another piece of my activities with Chinook Winds. And what he indicated to me was that we actually have a very specialized form of trusteeship in the United Church of Canada by which trustees in congregations typically hold property. It is not the same kind of trusteeship as you'll encounter if you happen to be the trustee of another charity here in Alberta. You fall under the Societies Act and the Alberta Trusts legislation, which has just been updated this year. And if you own or act for an organization outside the United Church, typically you'll fall under those federal and provincial regulations around trust ownership and trust administration. That is not the case for almost all trustees in the United Church of Canada. And for almost everyone, and I think actually everyone in this room, that is the case, okay? That your trusteeship falls under the Model Trust Deed, okay? So I want to explain what the difference is using a couple of homespun analogies, okay? So bear with me because it may not be 100% accurate. And also, if you really want a full deep dive on the differences between the trustee legislation in Canada and Alberta and the Model Trust Deed, Reverend Rosalind Campbell has done a huge piece of research on this as she's worked with a couple of our congregations in the region. I believe Rosalind is online today. And so at some point, some of you may want to get the full deep dive on the difference. But let me just give you a little cartoon version. Most of all focused on the Model Trust Deed. So when my son became 16 years old, he got his driver's license. And Shelley and I decided that we would give him my old 91 Buick for him to drive around in Lethbridge in, and I would have different vehicles to drive in here. And the deal that Eric and I had at that time was a trust. I trusted him with that car that was older than he was. And the relationship of trust was based on two principles. Don't wreck it, and don't do anything that I wouldn't do, okay? Which was a phrase that my grandfather used to typically say to me when I was leaving the house. He would say, oh, don't do anything I wouldn't do. So that was the trust relationship that we had. And Eric could then drive that car as long as he maintained it, paid for the gas, and some of the maintenance, the routine kinds of things that have to happen. Also, what we discovered is that Eric lived in Lethbridge, and those of you that live on the west side of Lethbridge or know the coulee, when you go down Whoop Up Drive, it's a great place just to let your vehicle coast. And what we discovered was that Eric loved to make his vehicle coast down the hill toward the downtown. And what we would get would be a lovely letter addressed from City Hall, City of Lethbridge, with a little picture inside of my car coasting down the hill as it went past the photo radar. Okay, so the don't do anything I wouldn't do was, guess what? You just paid the photo radar ticket, okay? That relationship is akin to the Model Trust Deed relationship in the United Church of Canada. As trustees, the United Church of Canada wants a relationship with you. We want to maintain that relationship. We want to keep in touch. And the intention of the model trust deed is designed to do that. So that means the message of the United Church of Canada to trustees in communities of faith is quite similar. Don't do anything we wouldn't do, and don't wreck it, okay? And that's basically what today boils down to, all right? As opposed to the typical trusteeship that you might see if you're involved with trusts anywhere else, because typical trust law now in Canada specifies certain things that it governs, certain tasks, certain pieces of property, and then says, basically, as long as you're within the lanes on any given piece of property or any given responsibility as a trustee, you can pretty much do what you like. And there doesn't need to be a relationship. The model trust deed is intended to create a relationship. And it's intended to create the kind of relationship whereby the region and the local communities of faith work together to jointly administer the assets that are held for the benefit of the United Church of Canada. Okay? Do you see what that means? Do you follow me on that? So it's a relational piece, okay? And that's the intention of the entire trustee structure in the United Church of Canada. The advantage to you is, unlike trusteeship elsewhere, where if you actually did something that went slightly outside the boundaries of whatever the prescribed relationship is, if you take on a responsibility or engage in an investment in another kind of trust that runs a little bit outside, you can be called to account directly for it. In the United Church of Canada, as long as you're following within the bounds of that model trust deed and following the policies and procedures that we have signed on to as a church, you are covered. You are covered. You're cared for within the family, so to speak. So the whole intention of the model trust deed is to make of us in this room and online a big, happy family full of people that share things for the benefit of the United Church of Canada with our congregations and with the church at large. Okay? So it's different here. It's about the relationship, and it's about building that connectivity amongst us. And that's one of the reasons why we're actually here today, is to help sort of strengthen that again. Because, of course, during the pandemic, everything has shifted, and it's difficult sometimes to stay connected to one another. Just remember, the rules are, don't do anything we wouldn't do, and don't wreck it. Sue.
Can you clarify who we is?
We.
Don't do anything we wouldn't do.
We would be the United Church of Canada, writ large as an organization, represented by Chinook Winds Region. She's looking at me. The we is in that. Don't do anything we wouldn't do is don't do anything the United Church of Canada, as under the Act, would not be authorized to do. Okay? The local trustees are the subjects of that.
Can you give an example for those of us who like examples? Concrete example of something that we couldn't do outside and something that we could do.
Don't sell your building without asking the oversight of Chinook Winds Region on behalf of the United Church first. Don't give away capital assets without asking for the permission of the United Church of Canada first, and we're going to talk a little bit about that shortly through Sue's comments. Okay? Does that help? There'll be more. We'll make it clearer. Are there any other questions? Who paid the fine? My son did. Okay. Yeah. Oh, yes, several times. Yeah. Yeah, you bet. Any other questions? Thanks very much. Over to you, Sue.
So I'm going to spend a few minutes now talking about the role of the trustee in your community of faith and on behalf of the United Church of Canada. We sent out when we, in the Chinook Winds newsletter, a link to the national website for the most updated handbook, and it's called the Congregational Board of Trustees Handbook, April 2021. And so my comments and everything I'm talking about comes directly from this handbook. A lot of this handbook is new. A lot of it is the same as the handbook was in 2007 and 2012. And so if you've been a trustee for years, you will have read parts of this, but it has gone into detail and is absolutely up to date and is the work and the rules that we are now working with as a property working group for the trustees. And so the first item is trustees hold congregational property in trust for the congregation as part of the United Church of Canada. So you don't own the building, you hold it in trust as part. And in the handbook, it then reflects that statement. Go to the manual and look at in the manual G221 or et cetera, et cetera. So the handbook is extremely clear, and just follow the steps, because some things in the handbook say as per the manual, and if you go, they give you exactly where to look in the manual, which is also available online. You can go to the national website and either look at it or download it, and you've got the 2022 handbook is the most recent one for the handbook. The congregation is the beneficial owner until it ceases to exist. Once a congregation ceases to exist, the ownership reverts to the next level of court or to the United Church of Canada. In most cases, when a congregation disbands, they've already looked after some of the property, but the benefactor of whatever is left goes to the next level of governance, which in our case is the region. Because if a congregation ceases to exist, there's nowhere for the proceeds. If they had a property, or if they didn't have a property, they had bank accounts, where it ends up. So it's sort of a benefactor style. And so that's why it says the congregation is the beneficial owner until it ceases to exist. And the congregation must follow the direction of the region for sale or other use of property, which is what Joel briefly spoke about in the trust model deed, and we'll get into more as to a flow. But if at any point your congregation is starting to think about doing anything that affects your property, your investments, your long-term leases, you need to reach out to the region first, rather than start the process and then sometimes find out you've got yourself into a tangled web that you can't untangle. And so we're saying, sometimes it's ask a question and our response was, go for it. You're in the right, or let us work with you and walk with you and guide you. We are not here to go against any of your work. We're here to support and walk with you in your work. Trustees are a mandatory part of the governance of every community of faith. So every community of faith needs to have a board of trustees. If you're part of a pastoral charge, a multi-point pastoral charge, every pastoral charge in that multi-point needs to have trustees. Even if you don't own tangible property, if you have liquid property, you need a board of trustees. And sometimes when it's a multi-point pastoral charge, the pastoral charge itself, the governing body of all the points coming together, needs a board of trustees, depending on whether there's property or whether there's liquid assets that have come together for the good of the multi-point pastoral charge. And so just always remember, trustees are a key part of the governance of both your community of faith, but also the governance of the multi-point pastoral charge. Definitely in our rural areas, we have multi-point pastoral charges. And so they could have 4 communities of faith. Each one of those communities of faith will have a board of trustees, and then they could be, the name of the multi-point pastoral charge could also have a board of trustees. So as per the manual, we need to have a minimum of 3 trustees, a maximum of 15 trustees. That does not count your minister. In the new handbook, and I think for the last 4 or 5 years for sure, ministers, your order of service, or your ordered ministry, are automatically a trustee. We at Chinook Winds Region, and we'll go into that later, don't recommend that the minister's name goes on title, because ministers come and go. But the minister is, the ordered person, is a member of your board of trustees. So if you are running on the leaner side with 3, you're really 4, because you're 3 people plus your ordered person. Do not start with 3, including your ordered person. It's that doesn't suit the handbook. So between 3 and 15 people is what is required as per the manual and the handbook. The majority of your trustees must be of full membership in your community of faith. That is a bit of a change. It used to be all trustees had to be full members. Now the majority, but adherents or others can be on your board of trustees that are not actual members of your community of faith. And we all have in our communities of faith, a good portion of our regular volunteers, attendees, hard workers in our church may not be actual members of your community of faith, but very, very well connected, and we call those adherents. And some boards of trustees may choose to have somebody from the outside world. Let's say if you don't have anybody in your community of faith that has any expertise on insurance, you may choose to ask somebody that you know that is well versed by insurance to either be a trustee or to be an advisor person to your trustees. But again, the majority of your trustees must be members of the community of faith, and the chair of your trustees must be a member of your community of faith. The handbook says the chair can also be the minister, which then follows the membership of the United Church Canada, because they are members of the United Church Canada. So that's sort of the stipulation on who can be a trustee from within your community of faith. And most of our churches, I'm sure, are on where they're almost all members. But understand that adherents are as important as your full membership. And the National Church is really working on what does true membership in the United Church mean, because belonging is different today than belonging was in 1925 or 1950 or 1975. And so our National Church is working on what does it really mean to be a member of the United Church of Canada. And there will be more information coming out on that as time unfolds. To be a trustee, you must be elected by your community of faith. Your council cannot just appoint people to be trustees, and so at congregational meeting duly called for the purpose of electing trustees, or a lot of our communities of faith do it at our annual meetings, and so it's part of the regular agenda items at your AGM. Trustees must be elected by the community of faith with a majority vote, which is 50+1. If a trustee, some of our communities of faith, the trustees have terms, and if a trustee's term ends, that does not require a vote for them to be completed, because when they were nominated, they were nominated with that term. If a trustee asks to step down, gives their resignation, which happens, that should be recognized at the next AGM when you're nominating new trustees or replacing. Then you accept, in most cases I would hope, with regret and thanksgiving for the time they served. That needs to be done, and then if you've got new trustees to add, or if the whole slate of trustees are done and you're putting on a whole new, that's all done by motion. And so that's the one piece that has to happen, is it has to be done through a motion by your congregation. And so and again, the motion is a majority vote, which is 50+1. Trustees are part of the governance of your community of faith. Trustees answer to your board, council, your governance model, whatever you happen to call it. And so they're directed through that governance model, but they have their own governance within that. Some trustees, communities of faith, some have, you need to take minutes for your meetings, and that's part of your role, but some have their trustees' bank accounts. It isn't mandatory and not always necessary that you have your own financials. Where a community of faith has investments that, especially if it's in today's world, shares or that are given, it's sometimes beneficial if the trustees has their own bank account, because then they have the wherewithal to cash in the shares, etc. A normal bank account or normal bookkeeper doesn't have that. A lot of trustees do not have and don't need to have separate bank accounts. It just depends on your financial situation. Some of our churches have foundations where the capital assets, the income, the liquid assets are held within the foundation, and therefore they have that bank account. But if it's, the trustees do not have to have their own bank account and financials, but if they do, they need to have bookkeeping set up, and then that information is fed to your board or council and incorporated into the financials of your board, of your community of faith each year. So I don't believe there's a lot of trustees, communities of faith where their trustees do have separate bank accounts, but if you do, you should be, and if you're not, need to be aware that you need to then pass your financials to your operations financials, and it's incorporated at year end as to the financials of the community of faith. The trustees for the property, your role is to make sure that the property is used as per the guidance of the United Church of Canada. As Joel said, you know, you're trusting it on behalf. And so the property rules are proper due diligence, good maintenance. We are responsible as trustees for what we call long-term leases, day-to-day or occasional rentals. That can happen through your operations or your board. But if you rent to a long-term group, a school, a daycare, another denomination, your trustees need to be part of that process and make sure that the church is not, it's handled properly. And long-term leases, so any lease that's more than a year or more, the region needs to be aware before you sign the final lease that this lease is happening, because our role on the region is to look at the lease and make sure that there's nothing in that lease that could come back on a legal ramification and bite us, whether it's the congregation or the wider church. And so we, as the region, need to be aware when you're engaging in long-term leases. And that is part of the role of the trustees, to oversee that work of your community of faith. And you also need to make sure that the lease that you're working with is a lease that falls under the United Church of Canada shoulds and shouldn't kind of thing. You know, I don't think, it's hard to say an example without being, but yeah, maybe to your community to do a long-term lease with ABC Bar. Is that quite the right thing to be in a long-term lease with? So the role of the trustees is to make sure that the lease is with a group that is part of the United Church diversity. That's the word I'm going to use. And so even now, as property working group, when you're going into a lease with another denomination, one of our roles as property working group is to say, is this going to put any detriment to your community of faith in the fact that we are a welcoming, diverse community of faith? And so to lease from a denomination that is not welcoming and is not diverse, that really puts your community of faith at risk, because you could both be in the building at the same time for meetings, and then if you are a welcoming church and they're a diverse church, I like that word better, and they don't support some of the things at the United Church, it makes it a little uncomfortable for the people that we want in our building. And so that's a new piece that we now as property working group are looking at and saying, yeah, it's a great thing that, you know, this other denomination is interested, but are they really the right renter or leasee that you want? Because it may cause angst within your own community of faith. So those are, and again, these are all detailed in greater length in the handbook. So definitely turn to the handbook for some of this information. The next item I'm going to talk about, of course, is trustees are responsible for the insurance. The insurance of your community of faith is the property insurance, the general liability insurance, crime insurance, directors and officers liability insurance, and in some case, business interruption insurance. If you have a major disaster and you can't have your building open for a while, there is coverage for insurance that will help on your lost revenue, which a lot of churches don't realize this. I worked in the industry and was the insurance guru for where I worked, and yeah, you understand it a bit. A lot of our communities of faith are on the national hub program for insurance. If you're on the National Hub program for the insurance, you will now be on the new program that the National Church has moved to effective December 1st, 2022, which is a self-insurance program. That self-insurance program is of no risk to you, the community of faith. The risk is being taken by the National Church. And the purpose of that program is to try and bring down the premiums. We all know how expensive insurance has gotten. And again, it's up to the trustees to look after this and make sure the insurance is appropriate for your community of faith. I believe every community of faith is covered directors and officers liability by the national program. That's an automatic. If you're a community of faith, you are under the directors and officers liability program. But if something happens that would trigger directors and officers liability, and you do not reach out to the National Church and let them know, you may not be covered, because the first step in insurance is to let your insurance company know. My motto used to be, when I was in the working world, any incident, be it tangible or intangible, that could possibly trigger insurance. The day I found out about it, which was in our, where I worked, it was a 24-hour notice for them to let me know, I reached out to my insurance company and said, I don't know if I will have a claim or not, but this is what happened. So they are aware something has happened. So that again is the role of the trustees. If something has happened, let your insurance company know, whether you have a claim or not, because it takes a while to sort it out, but let them know we have an incident that happened that could cause an insurance. Because if they don't know in due fashion, timely fashion, they may not cover it. And that is something a lot of our trustees aren't aware of. Let your insurance company, be it the national or your broker if you're using a different insurance company, let them know you have an incident that's happened. The national program, people are saying we haven't seen our renewal, we haven't heard. If you were on HUB program through the national, as your renewal comes, you are still insured. You may not have seen any paperwork yet. Because of it changing and transitioning to this new program, the National Church is struggling getting the information out quickly, but you are covered. And you should have received, if you were on HUB, you would have received through the fall a note that said we're going this route now and we will be in touch with you. As your insurance becomes renewed, you should have received, this is the next steps, they're looking for information, and you will get up to speed. They anticipate in the first year the premium will drop 15 to 20% from what you were paying the year before. And this is the intent of why the National Church said it's time to go self-insurance, is because the premiums were getting so high that some of our communities of faith, they couldn't afford insurance. And yet if they were on HUB, they were on, in lots of cases, paying less premiums than if you found your own broker and were doing it, because again, the mass helps bring the premiums down a bit. So the National Church has put right up front $3 million in capital that just sits in this insurance program, and then the premiums from the churches that are on this program will add to that to insure. There will be an insurance company that holds a very high level part of the insurance if it's a huge undertaking. Like I just can't fathom what it would be other than if you're in a property in downtown Toronto and I hate to talk about it because to me it makes it think like something could happen. But you have an insurance claim that's multi-million dollars, then the higher insurance that we will be involved with would kick in. But the day-to-day insurance claims, water leaks, roof, that will be covered. And you will just operate the same as you have been. You'll just contact whoever, and at this point I think it's Maria Pimpernelli who is the contact at the national office, but if you type in insurance on the national website it will say, but I believe it's Maria Pimpernelli who is, if you haven't heard anything and you were on HUB, that's who you want to reach out to if you haven't heard anything. If your renewal was in December, January, or February, I know they're behind. They definitely hope that by the time the spring renewals start, everything will just flow. If you're insured with others, your insurance just continues. When your renewal comes, you make sure that everything you have is covered. If you don't have a building or have sold your building, you still need to carry liability insurance if you're still a community of faith, of course directors and officers, and you may need to carry, I would call it contents insurance, because you may need to, as you're in conversations about what your next step is, but you have saved some of your material items, you need to have them insured wherever they're being stored. So keep in mind that even if you don't have a piece of property or with a building on it that is part of your community of faith, you still may need property insurance because you may have saved some special pieces that will go wherever you end up going. But you also still need to carry liability insurance and of course directors and officers, crime, because you're still a community of faith that is acting daily. And so you want to make sure that you still need, you are still carrying the right amount of insurance for who you are. And if you're not sure, reach out to your broker, have a conversation, or if it's on the national, reach out to them, or feel free to reach out to me, because insurance is an integral part of the role of trustees. I think that wraps up me. Any questions?
I had reason, I chair of the trustees here, and I had reason to call about insurance change on our plan. We are under the UCC Protect plan. I called this week. I did go through the website and tried to find Maria's phone contact, and I also found the hub contact. And I phoned directly on the 1-800 line and got somebody right on the hub desk who would look after it right away. So I think that's information that we can send out. Eric Matheson sent out an information bulletin earlier this year, and it had Maria Pipinelli's contact and also hub. And if you want to phone directly to hub, you can get right through.
Excellent. Thanks, Barrie. Any other questions?
Yes, when you talk about property, does that go beyond land and building to say, for example, a grand piano or something of great value? Or?
Yes. So property is land, buildings, all of the tangible items inside of the building, your church, your organ, your piano, your chairs, everything is part of your property. And then what we call liquid assets, which is money, cash, investments, that's all property in the world of property for trustees.
So if a congregation, say, wanted to sell a surplus piano, would we require consent from the region for that? Or
I don't believe on a situation of that, it would be up to the trustees to make sure you're not giving it, if it's new, grand piano, I understand today's in the $90,000 bracket, and if it's been around for many years, I would hope that the trustees say, well, I don't know what it would be worth. You would do your due diligence, contact Irene Bessie, which is, I think, the one place in Calgary that is willing to share that information of, a grand piano that's 50 years old or 20 years old, what you could get for it. And absolutely, I think you should sell it. I do not believe we as the Property Working Group need to be made aware of any pieces of furniture, items within your congregation that are being sold. But if that grand piano had been donated by a family in your community of faith, before you sell it, you need to reach out to that family, and if that person is passed on, then the younger generation, to say, is it okay? Because there's certain pieces of property within our communities of faith that were donated to stay within that community of faith. And sometimes you have to go one more step, sort of like when a church sells their property and is no longer going to have a building, there's certain items they need to reach out to the family and say, do you want these items back, or can we dispose of them? And so you have to be careful how you received that item. But if the community of faith in their startup bought the chairs and the piano and the organ and whatnot as they built the building and did the work, and through a fundraiser in the community you bought a new grand piano, that's different. But if a specific family donated it for that purpose, then you need to get permission. Do your best due diligence to try and get permission, because sometimes there's nobody left to reach out to. And so especially if it had been around for 100 years.
Does this also go for amalgamations? When I'm not too sure whether we've got a record from each individual congregation of the big assets,
Okay.
And going back to that.
Amalgamations are a little different, and Joel will speak to that in his next spot as to to do with if you've got two of something, you want to get rid of one.
duplication.
Yeah, Joel will speak a bit to that in his presentation, just a little down, because for me to answer it, Joel has it in his, and it'll be a better answer than I'm going to give at the top of my head.
Okay, and the other thing would be all of the duplicate communion supplies.
Yeah, and some of that we can speak to, and it just depends how it came to each community of faith. I think there's a question over on this side. Just a minute, here's the mic, because otherwise those online can't hear.
Number 9, the United Church property rules, that's referenced, like, you're looking for the United Church property rules, that's referenced in the manual, is it, or where would we find it?
It's referenced in this handbook.
Oh, it is.
And then where to go to, yeah. But it's, in my mind, it's common sense property rules. So, but yeah, if you have downloaded this, and I think it was page 17, under trustee responsibilities, ensuring proper use, there's a full section. So it's on page 17, and it goes on to speak about it, and then complying with decisions, and it links you to, if you keep the manual online, you could then click on the manual G 3.4.2, and it will take you to that. But that's only if you work with it online. But yeah, so page 17 will help give you some clarification on point number 9. Any other questions?
My name is Chuck, one of the trustee chair at Knox United. We have found over the years that we have added 2 other policies beyond what the hub program would offer. One was volunteer accident, which is about $350 a year. We have a lot of volunteers, and sometimes they will always have health care medical, but it may not be long enough if they've damaged themselves or need some physiology or something like that. Anyway, we also have a boiler and machinery policy, because we have a very large boiler and machinery system. So the hub would not carry enough if we had a major damage.
Okay, and so I apologize on not expanding on that. Property, to my mind, and property even when I was working, boiler and machinery is one of the subs under the general property, which is the actual touch the building kind of property that you're insuring, and your boiler and machinery is a piece of the touch. And there's, yeah, so thank you for clarifying that. And interesting, because I hadn't heard of the volunteer accident one. I do know some churches do the volunteer accident, pay a little bit more, and I think it's quite a bit more, through WCB to have a little bit of that. But the insurance is probably, if you say it's $350 a year, what you're paying, that's cheaper than if you have some of your key volunteers, like your operations team, let's say, who's doing the bigger, the maintenance kind of stuff. Then you have quite a bit of, your premium's much larger than $350 a year for WCB. So that's something for people to make a note of and talk to your insurance company about. Thank you.
I also wanted to say that since the note came out from Eric, from the head office on the 27th of September, we've been in contact with him, and I must say I'm disappointed that they still don't have this together for this program, which is officially called UCC Captive.
Yep.
UCC Captive Insurance Underwriting. So they've assured us that we would be covered. I feel uncomfortable with that. Our deadline for start date would have been March 1st, and Eric has known that since September. So I'm just, if you're in touch with the United Church, I think it's disappointing that they haven't had these renewals out. Okay,
I will, we'll let them know, but Barrie definitely got an answer, but you also need to realize that proposal had to go to General Council. So that was not approved until the end of July. And so therefore, their window of doing the work, they couldn't do any work until General Council approved the proposal to go this route. And so even though they have been talking and doing all the planning generally for it, absolutely nothing could be done until after General Council approved it, and it was on the parts of the proposals that were approved the last week of July. And so I know they have been slow. I think it was a little overwhelming, but they are working, and I think now if Barrie got that kind of a response, that's a really positive, so reach out to them now, and I think you'll get answers quicker. So and that's what I had understood. By the end of the first quarter of 2023, everything should be running fairly smoothly, and it sounds like it's there now. Oh, there's one more question at the back, one there and then one there, yep.
Yes, in Forest Lawn United Church. I was wondering, you have a partial coverage for insurance for all churches, the hub?
The one that's covered for all in churches is the directors and officers' liabilities. So if somebody on your board or on your governance does something that causes an insurance claim, you are covered as an individual. It's not, doesn't come back to you because you did something intentionally wrong. It would come back to you as an individual if your congregation did not carry directors and officers liability. It used to be a lot of congregations didn't. The National Church became aware of that, and now if you're a community of faith within the United Church of Canada, your directors and officers liability insurance is covered, and the cost of that is part of our assessment. That's the only portion that's automatically covered.
Why would they not have a complete insurance company to cover all the churches at one time? Instead of every church going to their own insurance company, you're going to get different prices from different ones. When you can get one insurance company to cover all of it, or the General Assembly do it itself.
Well, we were doing, that's what the hub insurance was up until December 1st, and that's what the self-insurance is going forward. Every community of faith was given the opportunity to go on the national program through hub, which helped the coverage and the cost. Some communities of faith chose to stay with their insurance company, whoever it was. And even today, on the self-insurance program, at this point, if you were on hub, unless you reached out to the national church and said, we don't want to go on we're going to find our own broker, you're on the new program, and any other community of faith that wasn't on hub, but likes the idea of the new program, reaches out and can be covered. But it isn't an automatic, because the national church doesn't know all the ins and outs of each community of faith for insurance, the value of your building, the value of your contents, all of those things. But there is the national program that everybody can go on, which does keep your premiums a little lower than each church going to their own insurance company.
Okay, thank you.
Jim here from McDougall. I'd like to go back to point 9, because I'm looking at the United Church manual, the one that was just recently changed. Mm-hmm. And unless I'm misreading it, on page 114, G145, A and B says that in the event that two congregations amalgamate and there's surplus property, it's regional council, it's you folks that decide what happens with the property, not the trustees.
And Joel will speak to that in his, because surplus property has many aspects. And so when Joel does his next piece, he will speak about that specifically. Yes, yeah, and Joel will speak to that, yep. I saw one
We
more.
have some questions from online. Val's going to
Okay.
ask.
So, just talk? Oh, okay, here I am. So I have one question from Carstairs and Bancroft. How are other churches insuring their property? Are they using the new National United Church in-house insurance program? And how has it worked out for them? So anybody want to give us any feedback on who are using the new National United Church program, and how is it working?
I don't think at this point, there would be a church that could speak to how it's working, other than, because it is such a new program, and we're just getting it up and running, and hopefully there's not been any claims yet in the new. So I don't think we have an answer to that question at this time, but again, reach out to the national office. We will, in the printed material that will be available after, we'll add that link for the national insurance program. But yeah, I don't think we have an answer at this point.
I have another question from online. What was the name of the insurer that provides volunteer accident insurance?
We use what were formerly called Rogers agencies in Calgary. I think it's now called ACERA, A-C-E-R-A. But they also administered the Hub International plan for us for many years since its inception. We've used them, and whenever we wanted to go to the new one, UCC captive, we made sure that Rogers had sent our latest appraisal of the building, which was just a year ago, the latest appraisal and all the documents up to that point to the United Church of Canada. So we made sure that you have to make sure that you had another agent, that they actually have transferred the data that the UCC captive will need to have before they can give you a quote.
Right. So that sounds then that they use the Hub Church, they use a local broker, and so therefore the Hub is the insurance company that's carrying the volunteer accident insurance. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, just a minute.
The Hub is that we had does not cover the boiler and machinery. Okay. It does not cover the accident for volunteers. Those were separate underwriters. So
okay, so then
we had 3 certificates.
All right. So what I'm hearing then is for the volunteer accident, they use a different. It's a different underwriting insurance. So if you are using a broker, talk to your broker about it. If you aren't using a broker and you're now with Hub and don't have a broker, again, talk to the National Hub program.
A question of clarity online. Rogers is the broker, but who is the insurance carrier? He
just clarified Hub and 2 others. So again, speak to your broker or reach out to Hub to see if they have it. Otherwise, send an email to myself at the Property Working Group, and we will get them the answer.
Okay, replacement insurance. Our church would, if it was a total loss, it would never be rebuilt to the size it is, or the location. I noticed the way it was defined, it was replacement, and there's a cash value dependent on depreciation of the building. But I want to know what depreciation means.
Your buildings are depreciated, but if you were to replace it today, the value is usually as per your municipality tax assessment. A lot of our churches carry replacement, which means it might have been built in 1950, but to have a building of this size, this square footage built today, what would it cost? And your premium reflects that. A lot of our churches also don't want to replace the existing building to the size that it is. And so, again, speak to your insurance broker or to Hub as to whether you want to pay for a building that's 20,000 square feet if something happened, a disaster, the whole building went, or whether you want it to be 11,500 square feet. It's going to have a different value, but I don't have the answers as to which is the right way to carry that. That's the role of your insurance broker or the carrier, and if you're on the national program, speak to them.
Okay, I was noticing the fact sheet of the UCC Protect, you had replacement insurance, and then under it, stated insurance. Stated being you set a value that you would insure for.
Exactly, because, again, are you insuring for the building? Because you have to, if you carry replacement insurance, you have to build it to the size that it was. And that's why it says state what you want, because a lot of our communities of faith are finding it costs so much for a 20,000 square foot building that you're not utilizing 60% of it.
And I have tried contacting Hub about that twice, and no replies.
Well, I'm just hearing from Barrie that he got quick answers, which I had heard there was no replies. So again, reach out, because it sounds like the national program's getting there.
Sue, I just wanted to indicate as an example that at Scarborough, our insurance expiry date was March the 1st, and 5 days ago we got our invoice, so they're definitely coming out. I don't know if anybody else has received theirs that had March 1st, but things are certainly rolling along from our perspective.
Thank you, and that was our understanding. Bear with us on the national program for the first quarter, because it was a huge new rollout. If within 5 days, so 2 weeks after the 1st of March, they received their invoice, that tells me they're getting on track. So if you have reached out to the national program and have not had a response, please reach out again. It sounds like they're on track.
And can I tell you that last year, it was 3 months before we got an invoice, or longer. So, so far they're doing good.
Thank you.
I have one question that doesn't have to do with property per se, but in this age of internet productions and stuff, do we have to have or look into additional insurance for that purpose?
Again, I would suggest you reach out to your broker or to the national, because yes, because there is cyber insurance now out there. Yeah. Barry's going to answer something.
We've been told there was cyber insurance for a very short period of time, but now there are no insurers that provide cyber insurance.
Yeah. So I'm going to take one more question, and then we're going to roll on to the next topic, or we could be on insurance for the full hour and a half coming.
I just wanted to comment that when you ask for replacement insurance, if you have unique aspects of your property, it cannot be absolutely replaced. They'll do the best they can. So, for instance, if you have a unique, like an organ, a pipe organ, it may never be built the same again as it was originally. You'll have to take, but so you can't actually replace it as it was. And that's true of stained glass windows as well. You take the best you can.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to now ask Joel to come up, because he's up next.
Thanks, Sue. Sounds like we could probably do with a workshop on insurance all on its own, simply because it's such a complicated issue. And I will touch on some of the points that were raised in terms of questions that were asked here just now. The section that we're kind of going to engage now would be, yes, indeed, this actually has happened, and don't repeat it. That would be the name of this section, okay? So in terms of trusteeship, again, to get back to that initial principle, the goal of the model trust deed is to create a relationship amongst us, okay? A relationship whereby you have trustee responsibilities and the United Church of Canada has a broader sort of context into which that fits. What do you think that means? Well, it means a bunch of things. It means that when it comes to signing leases and encumbering your property, if it's going to be something that lasts, the region needs to know. And lasts is anything longer than a year, okay? Or if you're going to have to make a substantial alteration, if you're going to renovate your basement to allow a new preschool in there, we need to know. In some circumstances, we may need to approve it. If there's an alteration to the building footprint, or an alteration to the value of the building in some significant way, we need to be able to know that and approve it in order to make sure that the family understands, okay? Because that's kind of how the model trust deed is set up. So trustees cannot encumber the property without the approval of the region. And that approval must be sought before you sign the agreement. That also means if you're selling something, and I could go down a huge rabbit hole here about manse sales, where agreements were reached within communities in the rural parts of the province before the region ever heard about it. And that is potentially a huge legal liability for the trustees, okay? Because you're actually selling something you do not own. I don't think that's legal. So what we actually have to do is make sure that at the first instance on these kinds of situations, before you transact your property, before you encumber your property, before you lease, talk to us. Contact Sue, contact myself, and we'll be able to help you out in terms of how to navigate the waters. We had a conversation around disbandment and amalgamation. So in an amalgamation scenario, what the congregations need to do is bring a plan of amalgamation to Chinook Winds Region. That actually gets approved not by the property working group, but by the Region Council Executive and by the Executive Minister. In that plan of amalgamation, all the details get taken care of in terms of governance, in terms of how the members will be dealt with, in terms of various different aspects of how the congregations function. And only if the region decides prior to amalgamation that there will be surplus property, the region will then declare a surplus, okay? So it's not immediate that if you amalgamate a church, there's surplus property. No, because sometimes we've amalgamated congregations or communities of faith and continue to operate with all the assets pretty much intact for both communities of faith. We have an example for right now, right on topic, is an amalgamation that took place in the Bow Valley. The Banff and the Canmore congregations have amalgamated. Both properties are going to retain operation as it is, because what we've done is created effectively two outlets for the same ministry in the Bow Valley. There's no surplus, okay? So just because you see something about there being a surplus doesn't mean the region is going to require that there be one. There needs to be a plan. And really the theme is there needs to be a plan for everything, because that's how the family works under the model trust deed, okay? And actually, when we consider that, I want to talk to you a little bit about the updating your trusteeship. Okay. Can we just go back one slide there, Dave? Updating trustees. So this is unique, mostly unique here in Alberta. Other provinces don't necessarily have the same requirements that we have here in Alberta. And so this is where we actually interface with the unique character of Alberta law. And Sue and Barrie and Mary and Mel online will tell you, we spend a lot of time dealing with land title stuff. I've actually learned it pretty good, even though I knew very little about it when I started working for the region this time around. The rules of updating your trustees are, do not try this at home, okay? And you don't have to go to a lawyer, okay? Because most lawyers in Alberta will immediately assume that we are registered as societies in the province of Alberta. For those bright sparks in the room that remember, or online that remember from the beginning, are we societies in the province of Alberta? Say it with me. No, we are not. We are incorporated under the United Church of Canada Act. We're actually not incorporated bodies. We are established under the United Church of Canada Act. And I'm looking at Rosalind in the back there and making sure I get my language correct. But the reality is, because we are established under the United Church of Canada Act, the rules are unique and the process is unique. And some of you will have seen the certificates that we have to do to update your trusteeships. hard copy, duplicate, in ink, snail mail, on the Gestetner, if you remember what a Gestetner looks like, okay? So realistically, the point to make is, just like the old Greyhound bus ad when we used to have Greyhound buses in Alberta, go Greyhound, leave the driving to us. Leave the driving to us, okay? We have a document that is available that is a guide to updating your trusteeship on your boards of trustees. But certainly, anytime you've got a question or you need to update your trusteeship, it's Sue, Barrie, Mel, I, Mary, we can all get you the answers that you need. And it's actually pretty simple, but it's complicated at the same time, okay? In Alberta, all trustees' names must be on the title. You cannot simply register a valid trusteeship in the province of Alberta by saying, the trustees of Buzzards Gulch United Church. That is not an entity that exists. All trustees must be named. Therefore, let me ask the question. If you have dead trustees, can they be trustees? No. Dead guys can't be trustees, right? Your trustees must be able to answer the call to a vote. That is the law under the Alberta Land Titles Act. There may be special dispensations in certain cases, but very, very rare. We have had, in fact, situations where congregations have ceased to exist and their parcels of land remain in the United Church of Canada's ownership. At the time of transfer of ownership, we actually have to manufacture new trustees by naming new people and go through that whole process. So it's that concrete and that granular, okay? Most lawyers will be able to do this for you once you get them started if you want to, but you actually don't have to. You don't have to fork out that kind of money because we actually know how to do it within the United Church of Canada, okay? So when you're trustees, so let's just go back. Trustees are voted by whom? The congregation. Why do you think that is? Why can't the board do it?
Which board?
Which board? Why can't the minister do it? The congregation is the actual entity that has the charitable status, that is the charity as established under the United Church of Canada. So the congregation, that is the body that has to speak, okay? So once trustees are nominated by the congregation, as soon as you get that nomination, make sure it's captured in your minutes of that congregational meeting. Make sure that you have full, real legal names, because registering a guy named Joe isn't going to work. The name is Joseph. And Alberta Land Titles will kick that thing back out, and you'll be another 6 months in the waiting list. Okay? So full legal names. And then the other thing that we're moving to in terms of our policy on updating trustees is it used to be we would say, what's your home address? Except that we have trustees now that spend 4 and 5 months a year in Yuma. So the address of service, the mail goes to their house, and they don't get the mail, because it's snail mail, until they return from Yuma. That's no good. So we've often been setting the address of service as the church's address. Okay? But we need those full legal names. We need a proper church address. And I'm typically going to be asking you to find a copy of the existing title so that we can actually make sure that the land is properly held, because yes, we have properties that are not legally held. And then there is a whole other set of issues that arises from that here in the province of Alberta. So that's why at the top of the list on trustees and Alberta land titles, what does it say? Don't try this at home. It will create more heartache and complication for all of us when we have to go through and redo the process 15 times over. And again, my contact is there. I'm Joel Den Haan. I'm the Community of Faith Strategy Consultant for Chinook Winds Region. My email is up there. I didn't put my phone number up there because I don't want my phone number on the web for Vladimir to give me a call. But the reality is, call us, contact Chinook Winds Region right away as soon as you need to do anything with your trusteeship. Oh, one thing further. You don't need to pass a motion in your congregational meeting to approve a trustee's removal if they're dead. That was a joke. Okay, dead trustees are fine. That's great. We'll remove them from the roll when we register the new ones. Okay? Okay. Any questions about that?
How often would you recommend changes of trustees? Would it be each time a new trustee comes on?
Yeah, it's actually not a recommendation, it's a requirement. Your trustee list with Alberta land titles must be kept up to date.
With every change?
It's not us under the United Church of Canada, it's LTO that is the ones that are requiring that.
Thank you.
Land Titles Office.
So do we need to update just the trustees that are coming off and going on, or do the whole body of trustees need to be redone?
It's the whole slate, because any changes then get incorporated in when you have your new slate comes in, okay? And I'm sorry this is so cumbersome and complicated. I didn't invent the rules. I think they were invented in about 1905, and the way they're being administered is about 1957. Okay? Right, the minister typically in Alberta doesn't go on title. The minister is a trustee ex officio on behalf of the United Church of Canada. The minister has the right, or the ministry personnel have the right, to chair the meeting of the trustees. They may or may not choose to do so, but they typically do not go on title because they change. Okay? So they're kind of ex officio, all right? I could go on and on about funny stories with Alberta land titles, but you probably don't want to hear them. Okay, so let's move to the next slide now. And some of the conversation that we heard earlier, some of the questions that were being asked, reflected the concept of the role of the trustees in a bigger picture. The role of trustees in a bigger picture, okay? And this is something that I actually had not fully appreciated until I dug back into the trustee handbook myself in preparation for this event. Trusteeship in the United Church of Canada, as we heard earlier, is somewhat different in character and form than a normal trusteeship in some other, body, some other legal entity. In the United Church of Canada, the requirement for trustees is that they follow a rule of prudence at all times. That is different than a trusteeship that says you're not allowed to take any risks. And many of our congregational trustees really, really struggle with this, meaning that we have all sorts of assets held by local communities of faith across Chinook Winds region that are in GICs bearing an interest rate of about 1%, not keeping up with inflation, and that is not prudent. Okay? So a prudent investor rule applies to your trusteeship for any assets that you hold, whether it be financial or property or anything in Alberta and in Canada. The prudent investor rule basically boils down to do what a person of sound mind with good advice, having secured the best education possible on a given piece of topic matter, would do, okay? Secure proper guidance. So if you're going to invest, talk to a broker. If you're going to deal with property, make sure that you get the oversight of the region involved first, okay? You're not allowed to mortgage your property or borrow against it without the region's approval, and the terms of all that borrowing must be provided for us to approve, because that's all part of being prudent, okay? Prudent simply means think it through. Make sure you have proper documentation, proper backing, proper guidance, a prospectus for any particular investment you're going to make. It doesn't mean don't take any risks whatsoever. So what that means is you have the opportunity to actually do some things to advance your community of faith's interests by being a trustee, okay? So if you happen to have reserves from a manse sale, for example, we do have a number of congregations over the past several decades who have sold off their manses in cities and towns across the province. If you have those proceeds and they are sitting in GICs carrying 1% interest, that's probably not prudent. There may be other ways that we can manage that money and advance the cause of your community of faith and the United Church of Canada. And the rule of prudence and faithfulness is, in fact, to seek that out. And we can help you with that from Chinook Winds Region, okay? So I want to make sure that I'm clear on that with you, that everybody kind of has an understanding of what that kind of means for your trusteeship in your communities of faith. So are there any questions about the rule of prudence? Did I make it that clear? Oh, that's right, you're just that smart, right on. Good, not like those other guys in the other place, right, I understand. Okay, so thanks for that, and with a view to how do we manage our assets for the benefit of the United Church of Canada, I want to touch on one more piece, and then I'm going to invite Barrie to come and share some thoughts with us. So, as trustees, you are named as trustees for your local community of faith. But when I go through all the documentation that we have to go through for Alberta land titles, over and over again, several different ways over, what do you think the documentation asks us to certify? So you're trustees for your local community of faith, but you're within the United Church of Canada. So what do you think we're legally required to ensure that you're doing?
That you're alive.
That you're alive, that's a good one.
That the property's the right property.
That the property's the right property, but that you're acting for the benefit of the United Church of Canada in your local community of faith. So, did you catch the nuance? So this is not, I'm a trustee for Buzzards Gulch United Church, and that's it. Okay? I'm a trustee for Buzzards Gulch United Church congregation as a congregation within the United Church of Canada. So the scope of your trusteeship actually is being part of that family. Part of that family. However dysfunctional it may be, however far-flung it may be, being a trustee, you're part of that United Church family because of the United Church of Canada Act. And so your trusteeship is not only for your local community of faith, it is on behalf of the United Church of Canada. Okay? Questions?
Just to make sure that I got this right. The trustees are elected by the congregation to be their representatives of the United Church of Canada. Is that?
Not really. It's not a representative. They're trustees on behalf of the United Church of Canada in that congregation.
Okay.
Okay? Representative is a little different thing. Okay, that'll be more like your region representative, but that's another story. Other questions? Good. Well, Barrie's got some stories to tell us that can tell us a little bit more about what this all means.
Well, I've been part of the Property Administration Committee on Calgary Presbytery for many years, and when that dissolved and Chinook Winds Region evolved, I volunteered to be part of this property working group, and we're a very small group, as you can see, providing some advice to congregations and to the executive minister on property matters. And we also, as Joel has just said, we facilitate getting the update of the trustees' names on the titles, which is not a complicated process when you get it done right. But the key thing is for the congregation to have their meeting, elect the trustees, and let us know, and we can carry it from there. It's not a difficult process, but we have to do it right, or Don Titles just sends it back to us. As a working group, we have no authority to make decisions or require any actions, but we are in a position to notice trends and concerns within the region. And ever since our inception, we have been seeing a decline in membership, some financial instability in some congregations, volunteer energy is going down, and just a general lack of enthusiasm within many congregations. But at the same time, we've seen some glimmers of hope, some congregations that want to do things differently. And so I was asked to prepare something for today, just to let you know what sorts of things we see coming along that are encouraging and that we would like to have you knowledgeable about and take part in if you wish. I have entitled this New Wineskins for New Wine. Most people like new adventures. Some people joyfully jump in with both feet, and others just dabble a toe in. Progress adapting to new realities is sometimes made with visionary foresight, and sometimes it's forced on us by something like a public health pandemic that we've just gone through. So whether by choice or by coercion, we all have to look at changing our priorities, our lifestyle, our relationships, and what's important that we want to get done. And so the church is in the same spot. We're examining our priorities. We're looking at our partnerships, who we can work together with, what's our ministry like, and what are our community needs. I don't need to tell you that, as most United Church members know, the societal headwinds that mainline churches like the United Church of Canada are facing are making it difficult to continue the style of ministry, the kinds of facilities, the staff, and the programs that we've had for many years. This is evident throughout the region. As I've just said, some of the closures and amalgamations, some of them have been going on in process for a long time. But at the same time, there's been a few encouraging signs from congregations that want to renew and do something different. And they've recognized the reality that we can't continue to do things the same way with the same facilities that we did 20 or 50 years ago. We need to adapt to new realities. So a new ministry style is evolving, involving partnerships with other churches, with other not-for-profit organizations, to put together projects that involve more than just the spiritual nurture and pastoral care that we've been known for many years, but to add to that such things as affordable daycare, affordable housing, some food programs, and that kind of thing, those community services kinds of things. I'm involved as an advisor to a project such as this right now. Ogden United Church in Calgary is redeveloping, and it's a project called Hub 29. And what you see on the screen there is the architect's drawing of what that building will look like. This is a project of an example of a project that is a new ministry initiative, and there are several others in planning stages in the region that we know of and we can talk about later if you're interested. The old Ogden United Church building was in need of substantial maintenance, and that's not unique. There's lots of churches in the region that are in that situation, requiring major maintenance. So whether to invest the money to make those changes. And with that building, they were struggling to fulfill their ministry to this working class community. A partner with some similar goals joined up with Ogden United Church to demolish that building and construct a new building. And so it was demolished last fall. The project is under construction right now. That's a fairly recent photograph. They're not quite finished on the exterior. They're working on the interior, doing the plumbing and wiring is basically done. They're now doing drywalling and doing the, starting from the bottom and working up. So what this building is designed to be is church space on the main floor that'll house the offices for the church, sanctuary space that'll double as a meeting room space, a cafeteria, and some administrative offices for the partner. And then on the lower level, there'll be a daycare and a preschool that will operate for affordable daycare for the people in that community. It's a working class community and is in need of subsidized daycare. And then the partner is funding and will administer the top 4 floors, which will be 24 units of affordable, accessible housing. This type of project, in my view, is part of the future of the United Church of Canada, how we're going to stay meaningful and relevant in the future. However, these projects take a considerable amount of capital investment, and that's a major barrier holding back some of these projects. So many of you will have heard other people in the congregation say, if we could just attract more young people to come to our church, we'd be fine. Well, the reality is setting in that our relevance in the future will be a result of our ability to adapt to the changing needs and challenges of our society and finding and funding new ministry projects, something like this Hub 29 project. So what can we do individually and collectively as communities of faith? As we all do our visioning, I'll just ask you to bring the first slide up there, Dave. As we all do our visioning, here are some questions that I would suggest that we take a look at. What is the role of the United Church in today's society? This is a question you might take to your trustees meeting or to your council or board. What is the role of the United Church in today's society? Sure ain't what it was when I was a father raising a young family 50 years ago. It's changed, and so what is it today? What initiative, smaller or larger, can our community of faith do to advance United Church values in our community so that we can retain the United Church presence, even though it may not have a church just like this that has its Sunday morning services? It's providing services the United Church values and has programs that are based on United Church values staying in the community. Is there another community of faith needing help from a partner like us to achieve a new missional project? Now, as you discuss this is where Chinook Winds Region might be able to help you with some ideas. We're not telling you what to do, but we've got some ideas that of things that are happening in the region, things that other churches are doing that you might like to emulate. So we could help in that regard. Some congregations have financial resources being held for possible future needs. These usually have resulted from capital sales of property, like Joel was mentioning, sales of property, man's property, or expire lots, or that kind of thing. So how can our community of faith with uncommitted financial resources partner with a fledgling project to yield fulfillment for all partners? Now, we're not suggesting that every church congregation has a pool of money that's not designated. There's most congregations that I know are kind of struggling to balance the budget. But there are a few who have surplus funds that aren't needed right now and may not ever be needed. And how are they being invested? And finally, what opportunities exist to not just give away or grant money to new ministry projects, but to invest in these to receive real financial returns, plus achieve missional objectives. So here again, this is something that the Chinook Winds region can probably help you with some ideas. As you've heard earlier in the discussion from Joel about the role of trustees, you and members of your congregation have a duty of care for investing financial resources in a responsible manner, making the church relevant to the needs of today and to continue the spiritual and pastoral care responsibilities that we have, and which the church has done very well in the past. The region is encouraging the use of debentures issued by projects like Hub 29, and there's others coming along, and they would pay competitive interest rates in which the congregation with latent funds could invest. This will provide a comparable income stream to other types of investments, and whether it's a small or a larger project in your community or elsewhere in the region, it can be a real benefit for these fledgling projects. Excuse me. It's often very difficult for these struggling new projects to get sufficient financial support to get them built. And so the future relevance of the United Church of Canada will be enhanced as a result of that leap of faith. So there's a partnership that we've been talking about, Joel has been talking about. So facilities with congregations that have facilities in good shape and in a good location, maybe all that's needed is to look at your priorities again and maybe reconfigure your space to incorporate space for a daycare or space for a food security program or something like that that's a community service. For congregations that the building has come to where it needs major work, maybe the best thing is to take a look at moving down the street a few blocks and take out a vacant bay in a strip mall to have the presence of your church continue in the community more effectively and at a lower cost. Rather than invest a lot of money in upgrading your facility, maybe that's a choice. For congregations where the building and the membership have come to their best before date, maybe the best solution is to invest essentially all of that capital into another new venture where there's some energy, some new vision, and that can be really invigorating for both the new fledgling congregation and the old one that's getting involved in a new project. I think it's important for you to remember that Chinook Winds Region volunteers and staff care and are dedicated to helping communities of faith achieve their vision for the United Church locally, regionally, and nationally. And these people strive to bring awareness to the opportunities for renewal and faith growth. It's not an effort here to confiscate monies that's in the congregation, but rather an invitation to invest in other communities of faith and partner with them in improving our service to all of our communities. So, new wine is in the making. Are we ready with new wineskins? Some thoughts for discussion.
I just want to thank Barrie for putting that thought together. He actually invested considerable time thinking this through from the perspective of his experience with the Ogden Hub 29 project in Calgary and the awareness of some of the other initiatives that are unfolding, both in terms of facilities, but also in terms of ministry initiatives such as our YYC campus ministry in Calgary, which is one of the only campus ministries across the country that has continually grown even through the pandemic. So we've got a number of opportunities where we can collaborate together, and I want to offer our thanks to Barrie for kind of thinking that through on behalf of the congregations in the region. Thanks, Barrie. I'll take a couple questions in a moment. I would be remiss if I didn't sort of provide a little bit of a sharper point to some of the thoughts around how we share and work together as the United Church of Canada in central and southern Alberta. So I want to ask you a few questions, or a couple of questions that I already know the answer to, okay? I do a statistical review of all 90 communities of faith in Chinook Winds region every year. I have the data now going back to 2013. Yes, it's a particular obsession of mine. So in that statistical review, I track congregations that are breaking even. I track congregations that are showing signs of long-term indebtedness or structural operating deficits. I track things like membership, and in particular, I track things like the total internally restricted reserves, okay? Internally restricted means that the congregation made a decision to put a certain set of limits around how they use their funds. Okay? So when I think about internally restricted reserves, I recognize that any given charity in Canada needs to have about $100,000 available to help wind things down if trouble strikes. And that can come either through property and asset sales or through using existing funds. So any congregation that has less than $100,000 in operating reserves, I don't count in my thinking around these internally restricted funds. Do you follow me? So we're going churches, United Church Communities of Faith in Chinook Winds region who have assets more than $100,000. Liquid assets. Like unrestricted reserves, cash equivalents, okay? How much do you think there is? 25, 15 to 20 million across our region, aggregated, and that's conservative. We actually have other congregations that have more. So to paraphrase the old Scotiabank slogan, we're richer than we think, and yet I hear congregations over and over again, communities of faith across the region and elsewhere saying, we are struggling to be able to make ends meet, and we can't take on anything new. So from my perspective as a consultant to the region, just to kind of bring my point to the close here and to follow on to Barrie's comments, we have an opportunity to be trustees and stewards on behalf of the entire United Church of Canada ministry here in central and southern Alberta through our own local communities of faith. The challenge over the next 4 or 5 years is going to be, how do we build that understanding of that broader family that has entrusted us to be their trustees? And that broader family has opportunities that may run beyond your local congregation. You can expect that you'll be hearing more about this as the region moves ahead here in the next few years, as part of what Barrie's saying and various other pieces. I just noticed that there was a question here from Joanne. We'll just get the mic over, Darren.
Thanks. Yes, thank you very much, Barrie, for your comments. Very, very useful and helpful. What is your last name? Because I would like to get in touch with you. Your last name? Clayton?
Yeah.
C-L?
I'll come and see you after.
Okay, thanks.
So I'll just share again that the slides that you've seen, because some of Barrie's questions were quite long and people were frantically writing them down, just share that those slides will be available to everybody that's registered for this event, and so they will be sent out after this event, so that if you didn't get all of Barrie's questions written down, you will see them, and it's something that you as trustees, but you may also want to share some of the thoughts of those questions and with your board and with workshops or congregational gatherings. Are there any other questions pertaining?
I can just comment that I have this electronically. If anybody wants this, just give me your email, I'll send it to you.
Yeah. Does anybody have any other questions to Barrie regarding his presentation, or any other thoughts? Okay, we will now move on to the last piece, of which I believe is Joel again. No? It's me? Oh. So actually, we're almost at close, so we're finishing up about a half hour ahead of our intended. We could go back to insurance, except for I may not have all the answers. But the last piece, which is really just a reminder, and I thought you were doing this, but is the process that what you need to do if you start to talk about what are we doing with our property, what's the future of our congregation, are we, as somebody shared, has our property and our volunteers reached their best before date? We do have a lot of communities of faith in our region that are operating with very small groups of people. We had a conversation with one of our members of our property team that said, we're going to run out of volunteers before we run out of money. And so we're saying, please, please, reach out to us, the region, the property working group, and as soon as you're starting to think about what's our next steps here at ABC United Church, reach out to us so that we can walk with you. We're more than willing to supply one of us that will come to your meetings as you're starting to do this work and be at the table when you're talking about it. But if we don't know that you're talking about it, we can't be there to support you. And so your first step, when it's what are we going to look like, or how are we going to move into the future, or is it time to amalgamate, or is it time to disband? Any of those questions, if those are now crossing your minds as you are doing your work in your community of faith, please reach out to Joel or myself, and somebody from Property Working Group will get in touch with you and say, let's have a conversation first, and then as that unfolds, we'll walk with you in that step. Because, as I said at the beginning, we have had to, in the last couple years, untangle the web that happened long before the region, and we've been successful, and we've untangled 2 or 3 of them quite well, but we weren't aware of them, and then we get this, our congregation disband, but we still have a piece of property in ABC or in Newvat or wherever it happens to be. How do we get rid, and that's when Joel said sometimes we have to create a slate of trustees to just deal with a piece of property that's just sort of sitting there in this little rural place in southern Alberta. And so we can't help you if we don't know. But we're sure willing to help you and work with you, because you're not walking this alone, we're not walking this alone. We're in this together, we're all part of the bigger picture, which is this beautiful United Church of Canada. I just want to check, are there any questions from the virtual that you want on any aspects?
There's one question for Joel. Someone wanted some clarification around reserves.
Clarification around reserves. Well, I wonder what clarification might be appropriate. We can tell you that when one's manse is sold, the first priority typically is to offset the cost of housing for the ministry personnel, and that has been a long-standing policy in the United Church of Canada, and it remains in place. But when it comes to congregational reserves, they are in fact internally restricted by the congregation themselves. And they may be restricted because the congregation has accepted a contribution from a given family member. So let me give you an example. It may be possible that someone has bequeathed $50,000 to help preserve the stained glass windows in your sanctuary, and that gift was tied to preservation of those windows. That is actually an internally restricted fund, because as soon as you accept that gift with the terms that it has been offered as, you're accepting that restriction. The congregation is taking that on, and as trustees, you're maintaining that trustee relationship with the donor. However, to clarify further on reserves, so we have some reserves if you have manse proceeds, that some of that needs to be used to offset. Typically the return on investment is used to offset housing costs. Sometimes you get reserves that are dedicated to a particular purpose, but other times congregations just plain have reserves from previous bequests that were unrestricted or other circumstances, and those reserves are at the discretion of the of the congregation itself, within the bounds of the approval of the region. So you can't just sort of give them away and start a business, but the congregation has much more flexibility around how we deal with internally restricted reserves than many people typically think. Okay? And it's simply that we need to make a decision together. So assets that once were pledged to maintain a Sunday school program, or I had one situation where there was a reserve that was pledged to maintain the High C group in a given congregation. Who remembers High C?
Because we're gray hairs.
Members.
Yeah, because we're gray hair.
But guess what? If you don't have a High C group, the congregation really should have a meeting to talk that over and say, maybe the reason we restricted the funds in this way doesn't really exist anymore. So keeping your reserves up to date is a helpful thing as well, your regulations around your reserves. Does that help clarify the question? Hopefully it does. And if there's any further questions from the individual online who is asking, please, my email's up there. Happy to help in any way I can.
She said no. You're good.
It didn't clarify the question.
It did. You're good. She doesn't have any further questions.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah. Perfect.
All right.
Okay, so if there's no further questions, I would like to thank all of you for taking the time to come or to be online, and we hope that this was helpful for you, the trustees of your community of faith. We are available for those that are here in person to chat with after for a few minutes. For those online, if you have any further questions or something comes to mind, do not hesitate to send an email to Joel or reach out to myself, Sue Brodrick at shaw.ca, at shaw.ca, and it's Brodrick, no E in it. And we will make the recording available, because for some of you trustees, you may all be here from your community of faith, or maybe just one or two, but you may want to look at it again. What did they say about this or that? And so the recording will be available, the PowerPoint will be available, and definitely going forward, the Property Working Group is going to offer more workshops like this. something will happen in the fall, nothing until then, because of course the AGM is coming up in May, and then we hope, to allow staff to have some summer break and whatnot. But now that we, as a church, can meet in person again, we feel that being in community and sharing information helps us be this wonderful United Church of Canada that we're all part of. So I just say, travel safe if you've traveled from outside of the city. Go in peace, and thank you for being part of this workshop.
So I've got a book at the registration desk. If anybody wants a digital copy of what I gave, you can just put your email down there. Thanks. Thank you so much for coming, and thanks to Jim Porter, one of our trustees, for making the coffees. There's more there. May as well drink it up so he doesn't have to throw it out. Thanks for coming.
For hosting.